International Day of Elimination of Racial Discrimination is observed annually on the day the police in Sharpeville, South Africa opened fire and killed 69 people at a peaceful demonstration against apartheid pass laws in 1960. In 1979, the General Assembly adopted a program of activities to be undertaken during the second half of the decade for action to combat racism and racial discrimination. On that occasion, the General Assembly decided that a week of solidarity with the peoples struggling against racism and racial discrimination, beginning on 21st March, would be organized annually by all states. Since then, an apartheid system in South Africa has been dismantled. Racist laws and practices have been abolished in many countries, and we have built an international framework for fighting racism guided by the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The convention is now nearing universal ratification, yet still in all regions, too many individuals, communities and societies suffer from the injustice and stigma that racism brings. The 2022 edition of the International Day focuses on the theme Voices for Action Against Racism. This edition aims in particular at highlighting the importance of strengthening meaningful and safe public participation and representation in all areas of decision making to prevent and combat racial discrimination, reaffirming the importance of full respect for the rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly and of protecting civic space and recognizing the contribution of individuals and organizations that stand up against racial discrimination and the challenges they face. The simple message can be a powerful vehicle to encourage people everywhere to strengthen and consolidate their voices against racism, to mobilize against all forms and manifestations of racial discrimination and injustice, and to ensure a safe environment for those who speak up. It lends itself towards telling personal interest stories and can feature people and population from across the world. This theme draws all inspiration on the High Commissioner's report on racial justice and the agenda towards transformative change for racial justice and equality. Ensure that people of African descent and those who stand up against racism are protected and heard, and their concerns are acted on. Thank you.
The International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination is observed annually on 21st March. On that day in 1960, police opened fire at a peaceful demonstration in Sharpeville, South Africa against the apartheid pass law. 69 people were killed and 180 were injured. Proclaiming the day in 1966, the United Nations General Assembly called on the international community to redouble its efforts to eliminate all forms of racial discrimination. The 2022 edition of the International Day focuses on the theme Voices for Action Against Racism. This aims in particular at highlighting the importance of strengthening meaningful and safe public participation and representation in all areas of decision making to prevent and combat racial discrimination, reaffirming the importance of full respect for the right to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly and of protecting civic space, and recognizing the contribution of individuals and organizations that stand up against racial discrimination and the challenges they face. This simple message can be a powerful vehicle to encourage people everywhere to strengthen and consolidate their voices against racism, to mobilize against all forms and manifestations of racial discrimination and injustice, and to ensure a safe environment for those who speak up. It lends itself towards telling personal interest stories and can feature people and population from across the world. The theme also draws inspiration on the High Commissioner's report on racial justice and the agenda towards transformative change for racial justice and equality. It also insists us to ensure that people of African descent and those who stand up against racism are protected and heard, and their concerns are acted in. Through new approaches to intercultural dialogue and learning, youth and communities can be equipped with skills to eradicate harmful stereotypes and foster tolerance. Recent and new manifestations of racism and discrimination call for renewed commitments to mobilize for equality. Racism will not be overcome with mere professions of good faith but must be combated with anti racist actions. A global culture of tolerance, equality, and anti discrimination should be built first and foremost in the minds of men and women.
The 21st of March is the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Rallies, gatherings, and various events which call for the elimination of racial discrimination are held around the world on this day. So why was March 21st chosen? Its historical origin happened 60 years ago. At that time, South Africa was under the apartheid regime, which segregated non-white, especially black people. Yet people kept fighting, despite the strict control by the government. On the 21st of March, in 1960, 5,000 black Africans rallied in a town called Sharpeville to peacefully protest against apartheid. Against them, police opened fire brutally. "69 people were killed, and 100 people were injured. Among them, there were women and even children. These 69 people were killed for simply raising their voice peacefully against the apartheid regime. To remember this incident, in 1966, the United Nations proclaimed the 21st of March as the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination to reaffirm its strong will to combat racism. However, racial discrimination still continues and inflicts pain on many people. Refugees and asylum seekers fleeing for safety often face human rights violations in their destinations. Immigrants continue to experience discrimination and violence in countries which they have made their home. Those who have lived in a country for generations are not exempt from this. Some politicians and high-ranking officials are still propagating racism and intolerance. On the street and on the internet, hate speech against minorities and indigenous peoples are rampant, hurting many people. Racial discrimination is not a thing of the past and is still in many of our communities. This March 21st, the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, come and join us to make the voice of no racism heard.
No matter who we are, no matter where we live, we are just mortal beings. We are given life one day and taken back when it expires. Shameless act by lifeless beings struggling for life over what no one had control over. Could be my color, race, caste. Don't know where to start, but caught in a rat chase.
Audre Lorde, an American writer, once said, "It is not our differences that divide us. It is our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences."